personal finance ever since I was in I've always been interested in money. I got an allowance when I was growing up, and so I enjoyed saving and spending it on things that I liked. And then when I got into my 20s, I found myself in a lot of credit card debt and realized one day that I did not have enough money to meet the minimum payment.
Mm,
So at that point, I started educating myself, and then I thought it was only about financial education. So I kept reading everything. So from that point forward, I was always reading about money and how to use it the best. And I also am altruistic by nature. I'm an INFP type, Briggs Myers. So you too. So I had always worked in nonprofits and academia, but I tried a couple times to get into the financial industry. I thought, oh, financial planning, like they help people and with money, and that's just two things that I like. But every time I did, every time I talked to someone who was in the industry, they did not make it sound very appealing. Like they made it sound more of like a sales job. And at that time, I thought, no, I'm not a salesperson. That's not for me. And so I just stuck with what I was doing. But then about 8 years ago, I moved. We moved for my husband's job at the time. And so it gave me the chance to reassess what I wanted to do. And I found this online program for a master's degree in financial planning. And I thought, well, even if it just helps me and my family, that will be worth it. So I enrolled and I got really excited because financial planning had changed a lot in the last 10 years. And I discovered that there were different ways to work with people who are not ultra wealthy, but just regular everyday people like me. And so I thought I was going to be a financial advisor. But as I went through the program more and more, it was a really great program because it was career changers like me, but also financial professionals, advisors, and educators and coaches.
mm,
And what I was realizing is that in the conversations we had together, they often thought that there was always a financial solution to every financial problem. And I didn't see it that way. And I was not hearing any discussion around the emotions of money. We
mm.
had to take a financial counseling course. And so many of my classmates had a really hard time with this course because we had to work with practice clients and not wealthy people, but people with their everyday, debt management and budgeting. And they found that they just didn't have those soft skills. And they also, yeah, there was just this disconnect. And what I found when I went through that exercise was, oh my gosh, this is so emotional. The couple that I met with, I just couldn't believe how it was just so palpable in the room when we were talking about their budgeting and their numbers. And so after that, that was a real changing point for me. I really wanted to explore more of the emotional side. And some part of me always realized that money was emotional, even though my parents didn't talk about it much. I just had this sense. There was just, yeah, there's something about it that's very charged. At least it was in my household. So I did some research and I came across the Money Coaching Institute and I became trained as a certified money coach. So that allows me to work with clients in a specific method to help them, not with their numbers, but to help them understand their relationship with money, which has everything to do with their relationship with themselves and also what money beliefs and behaviors they inherited from their parents. And it's just such fascinating work. So that's how I got into it.
Interesting. And I was looking at your LinkedIn profile earlier this week, and I noticed that you actually got your undergrad in English, if I remember
Yes.
correctly.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about that. And so, and similarly, I got my undergrad not in English, although if I had been more self-aware, I probably would have. But uh, my undergrad eventually was in marketing. And then I got into the money side when I got my master's degree. So similar to your path, just different. Um, so tell me what attracted you to the English side of the campus, and what that transition was like for you between that. One, is that an interest that's still alive and well within you? And I notice all the books behind you, but I will let you answer that question.
Sure. Yeah, so we're actually living with my father-in-law at the moment. So these are his books. He has lots of degrees. I do like to read. But my choice of English as my major was actually by default, and it kind of led me to my career and my journey in life to realize that because I had always been good in English. I always got A's, and I did enjoy writing. So when I got to college, that was I was always afraid of stepping out of that zone of which I knew I could achieve. And if I hadn't been, I definitely would have majored in psychology. And it's interesting because now that I realize like everything that I've gone through personally, so personal finance has always been an interest of mine and personal development has always been interest. And what I do, I see completely as the intersection of those two things. And so the more I realized like, oh my gosh, when I was growing up, I had to be smart and I was the smart one. And that's what I needed to do to get the attention from my parents. And it limited me so much. And this is something I've only, pretty recently begin to really understand in depth. And so I would never stray away from my comfort zone. So I just by default majored in English. And I really didn't even like it that much, like some of my classes, but honestly, most of the English lit classes I did not appreciate very much. And so yeah, so now it's so interesting that my original desire was to major in psychology, but at the time I thought I didn't know what I would do with it because my heart says, oh, I want to help people, maybe be a social worker. But at the time I didn't realize that I wouldn't be personally responsible for people who I was working with. And that was what my thought was. And I thought, oh, I don't want to be responsible for other people. So let me just major in English instead. Whereas now I feel like I've come full circle because so much of what I do is influenced and based in psychology. And I'm actually training now to be a practitioner of rapid transformational therapy, RTT, which is a method of helping people get to the root cause of an issue,
Mm.
which I've always been fascinated by, and it's what I strive to do in my money coaching practice now.
Nice. Well, it's interesting that you say that because I think I went the route that I went, and I wasn't the English route because although I generally did well in English, I always did much better in math. At least that's the story that I tell. My grades might tell a different story, but I gravitated towards not English, to engineering and things that use more of the intellectual, the knowledge side, technical side of things. And it wasn't until I really started tapping into my heart and listening to what my heart was saying that, similarly, also being an INFP and an idealist and, wanting to change the world and make a bigger difference and all that kind of thing, that I really began to figure out how do we integrate, these different elements of ourselves. How do we create a richer relationship, with people? How do we create a richer relationship with ourselves? How do we create a richer relationship with our money, right? And one of the things that I've noticed about some of the things that you've shared is just how central money is to the different relationships in our lives, right? That money isn't just this abstract thing that, that we have to, send our receipts to our tax accountant so they can fill out the forms and, we won't be captured by the IRS man or whoever it is that, that's coming after us for not filling out our forms, but that money tells a story of its own, right? That there's a relationship between ourselves, our money, and our relationships with others. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How does money show up in different relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I think since I started doing this work, I think the thing that my biggest revelation is that money is not apart from us. It's not this one area of our life. It is totally integrated into who we are, how we show up in the world, and how we are in our relationships. Um, as just one example, like power, our sense of power, and if we're able to have clear boundaries and speak our truth and stand up for what we believe and voice our objections directly, like that relates completely. If we're able to do that in our relationship with our partner or with our children or with our parents or with our friends or colleagues, coworkers, if we're able to do that, then that is also going to be the way that we relate with money. We're going to use money in the same way. So many people, especially so many women, have been disempowered growing up, made to think that, and given very mixed messages, but one of those messages clearly is you don't need to worry so much about money, like someone else will take care of that. Um, and so when we're raised that way, and also raised that, women, we have to take special care of other people's emotions and make sure that they're not angry at us, or yeah, that we have to take more care to get our needs met in a way that takes into account other people, just for historical reasons, for millennia, just being smaller than men and all of that. And it all plays out with money. And so what I've come to understand is that the more we understand ourselves, the better our relationship with money is, but that it works both ways. So what I love about this work is that it helps people understand themselves better just by looking at their money. And it's often they're not expecting that at all.
Sure.
So it's a really nice surprise. Like, two of the outcomes of my work is better management of money, but the other outcome that goes hand in hand with that is a better relationship with yourself, feeling better about yourself. One of my clients recently said, after we worked together, and then I always have a follow-up call a few weeks later to see how things are going, and she said, gosh, I didn't realize how mean I had been to myself all of that time. And that really came out during the coaching process.
Hmm.
We just, yeah, our inner critic just rules our lives. And I know I'm constantly trying to pay attention to that, because I know it's there and sometimes I can't hear it. But when I find myself in, a really bad mood, I have to think to myself, okay, what are the words I'm telling myself? And it's always something negative.
That's really interesting. Two things. One of the ways that I worked my way out of severe depression was paying attention to the language that I was using with regards to myself. And then as I developed some facility with that, I also realized that it wasn't just the language that I was using with myself. It was a language that I used in relationship to others, to the work that I was doing, et cetera. That our language, just like money, perhaps there's a currency of conversation that, that when we learn to use better language, that we can influence things in more positive ways, right? Similarly, with how we're using our money, we can go into severe debt, like you mentioned earlier, and I've dealt with similar circumstances in my own life when, the credit card debt piles up and I'm figuring out, what credit card do I need to borrow from in order to pay this other credit card? And it's, as my mom would always say, rob Peter to pay Paul, and we're just playing this game without really having a good handle on what we're doing. And the the words we're using can inform us as to what's happening, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the core principles of RTT, is that the words you use and the pictures that you make in your mind are your reality. They become your beliefs, and then that leads to your actions, which becomes your life. Yeah,
Wow.
it's so powerful. And it comes way back from childhood. We get our self-esteem, we get our sense of self from our parents first, and hardly any of us reach adulthood without any holes in that. So it's our jobs as adults to understand the needs that we didn't get met. And I think many of us just don't even understand. It's just so normalized. And as long as we kind of look the same as other people, and we're yeah, doing okay with our comparison to our neighbors, then we don't realize all of these emotional needs that we didn't get met. and that it often acts out in our spending. Of course, I mean, we're going to meet our needs one way or the other. So if we can't meet them directly, we're going to meet them some other way.
Hmm. Yes. You remind me of this conversation reminded me of my relationship with my parents. My dad would had an incredible sense of style. First of all, he didn't work as an artist until he retired, and even then, it was more of he practiced it as more of a hobby. But his sense of style came out in his choice of clothes, and he would, whenever he was upset, he'd go to Nordstrom's, and do retail therapy, and he had an incredible wardrobe. He was always probably the most best dressed guy I've ever known in my life, but he was also really struggling with money because he didn't have a good handle on his relationship with his money, with his choices, with himself. That it was his relationship with money was a reflection of himself and not just a reflection of current circumstances. Um, and meanwhile, my mom, who came from a wealthy family, um, was more, my parents' roles were largely reversed, in that mom was more of the one that handled all the finances and made sure that we had a roof over our head and all that kind of thing. And it was just, there was so much tension there. And it showed up in the language, it showed up in the tone, it showed up in the emotions. Uh, and much of my life has been figuring out, how do I create a better relationship with my family, with my money, with myself. You know, they're all interconnected. And one of the things that helped me understand that better was just actually looking at the definition of money. That if you just go to the dictionary and look up the definition of money, that it's essentially what it is it's a vehicle of exchange between two people, right? So I give you something of value and you give me something of value. So what I might be giving you a value, might be coaching, and you might be giving me money, or vice versa. And how that exchange plays out has a lot to do with the value that we place upon ourselves, upon each other, upon money itself. And it's really an interesting cycle that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then money, yeah, it's so simple, yet it comes to mean so many different things and often contradictory things. And so that's what gets so confusing. And especially if you grow up in a household where a parent was very controlling with money, or your parents, you grew up with parents who talked really badly about wealthy people, which, I mean, most of us do, regardless of how much money you have. There's always someone richer and meaner than you. But when that happens, then we just begin to associate money with evil, with greed, with workaholism, or taking advantage of other people. And when it all comes down to it, money is just, it makes someone more of who they are. It doesn't it never changes anybody as a person, but makes you more of who you are. It's
Mm.
extremely stressful when you don't have enough, but once you have enough, yeah, it just amplifies you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've often thought about relationships being similar, in that the people that we associate with can be amplifiers of who we are, but they
Mm.
either amplify our good points or amplify our not so good points. And same thing with money, is that it can be a magnifier of who we are, of our values, and how we're showing up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So I'm curious, why is it that our relationship with money is so often entrenched in us that it's hard to change our behaviors and thinking around money?
Yeah, for a couple reasons. Mostly because all of our behaviors around money most of them formed early in life. And so they're in our subconscious. They formed because we inherit our parents' beliefs. Usually we just take them on as they are without questioning them until maybe later in adulthood. Or even if we react against them, sometimes we just have like a visceral reaction. No, I'm not going to be that way. But even when we do that, that's also subconscious. It's just an automatic rejection. And so until we understand that these beliefs that we have aren't actually our own, and that's also a place where a lot of people get really conflicted, and tension arises because they might be feeling one thing internally, but then they have this inherited belief that's something else, and then they're not sure what to believe, and then they flip back and forth between. Yeah, so that's one reason. And also um, because so since most of it's in our subconscious, most of the time, so money is a core survival issue, and our brain's job is to keep us safe. Our mind's job, especially the subconscious, is to keep us safe physically and emotionally. So, for example, if you're very young and your parents are arguing about money a lot, your mind might form this belief that, it senses that you're scared, so it's going to do something to protect you from that situation. But if you live in a small house or an apartment, you can't, and you're young, you can't physically get away. So it has to be really clever about how it's going to protect you from hearing these arguments about money, which makes you feel unsafe. Your heart's pounding and your brain is responding to this. So it might make you a little bit foggy headed whenever people mention money. It might make you like really zone in on whatever you're doing and playing with your toys so that you're distracted and not really knowing what's going on around you. And this is pretty common. And then as an adult, you realize, oh, yikes, I don't know what I'm doing with my money. I need to figure this out. And then you start reading books. And after 2 pages, you get foggy headed and you have to put it down. And then you start blaming yourself. Well, there's just something wrong with me. I don't have any willpower. I don't have, I don't see things through. And then that prevents you from, seeking the help that you need. So it's can be a very vicious cycle there. But in summary, yeah, it's because we don't understand where these beliefs and behaviors are coming from, because it's in our subconscious. And until we go back to the origin of when they formed and why, then we can understand them. Then it brings it to our conscious awareness. And that's the only point. Once it's in our conscious awareness, then we can decide, okay, I see where this belief was formed, and I understand that it was trying to protect me, but I also know now I need to read about money. I need to be financially literate. And so I don't need that to protect me anymore. It's time to, start learning more. And then at that point, once you accept that, accept where you are instead of fighting against it, then you can think, okay, what resources do I need? Do I need to work with a money coach? Do I need to read you know, let me ask for suggestions for a book because the books I read before didn't work, so then you can work. Now you just know what you're working with now. Whereas before you think it's just about numbers. So then you try to do a budget, and don't get me started on budgets. That's like a 100-point process that people think like, it's like always the first answer in some article about how to, manage your money. Oh, make a budget, stick to a
Right.
budget. Like it's so easy.
Your thoughts about the budget remind me of kind of my struggles with staying on not so much a diet. It is a diet, but it's not like a keto diet or anything. It's just, and those slices of cheesecake and coconut cream pie and, that kind of stuff I can know everything that I need to know, but if the environment doesn't support me in making the decisions that I want to make that are helpful for me, uh, that we can be at loggerheads with one another, right? That, I can have all the knowledge that I have about money, and believe me, I've put together lots of budgets and lots of models and, done all kinds of analysis on money. I'm pretty conversant and pretty comfortable dealing with the technical aspects of it. It wasn't until I started to deal with the emotional aspects of it, though, that my relationship, especially since the midlife crisis that I endured, happened that I stopped having an oppositional relationship with money and started to see it more uh, as an alliance rather than a opposition. And I think, and I'm someone that's trained, years of school, years of experience dealing with that type of stuff, and I've never had an issue with numbers. Numbers have always been something that have come easily for me, and I can't imagine, can only imagine what it's like for someone who doesn't have that background. Where numbers is a foreign language, and how do we make this happen, and how do we, and confronting the emotional side at the same time. That if the head and the heart, neither one of them are having a good relationship with this thing called money, then how do you move forward? How do you create the life that you want to be living?
Yeah, it's particularly difficult in that circumstance when it's, as you said, the emotional part and the financial literacy at the same time. And that's why, especially when that is true, you always have to go to the emotional part first. Well, everybody does, but if both things are missing, you cannot start with numbers. It just
Mm.
won't work. You have to go to the emotional part first.
And that's a really interesting point, because that, as you said earlier about, the various articles out there about, getting into a better financial situation, they almost always start out with, let's start with a budget. It's not, well, let's figure out what your emotions are with regards to money. It's,
Mhm.
let's look at the numbers first. And with my training and background, that would make sense if it weren't for the elephant in the room being that, I don't want to look at those numbers. I don't want to deal with, I'm dealing with an emotional crisis, and it's showing up in my life in the relationship that I have with money. And you're telling me that the way that I've got to go through it is I need to look at the numbers and make sense of it all. If I'm in that fog that you were talking about earlier on, it's really hard to look at the numbers in a way that is empowering rather than disempowering.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, yeah. And even people who yeah, they have the numbers down pat. Like I've worked with many financial advisors. They know this stuff. Like I have a master's degree in financial planning, but it wasn't until after that that I got into money coaching, that I was trained in this myself and went through this process myself, that I realized, oh my God, I had such a scarcity mindset. And I think a lot of financial professionals get into that line of work because of that, and because they
Mm.
think the more information that they have about it, the more secure they're going to feel. And then they realize, oh, there's no there's no point in which I'm going to feel this way. um, yes, yeah, it's really interesting. But yeah, as to what you were saying, like I know I have a book in me somewhere, and the title that keeps popping in my head is "What's Money Got to Do with It?" Like, what has money got to do with your financial life? Because until you zero in on what is causing all of this, which is our self-esteem. Like I think of this as like a pyramid, and the base is self-esteem. So if you have, and we all do, like 99.99999% of us have holes that need to be filled in. We need to identify what they are, because if we don't do that, nothing's going to change. It starts with the self-worth, and
Mm.
then on top of that, we need to examine the beliefs that we inherited from our parents and decide which ones are good and which ones are not, which ones are aligned with us, which ones we want to let go. And only then I feel, and then after that, if you need financial education, that's the best time for it, because then you're ready for it.
Mm. Interesting. So tell me a little bit on the other side of this. We've talked a lot about kind of how things don't typically work. Uh, Tell me about when people go through the work that they had do with you and heal their relationship, their emotional connection with money. How does that show up in their lives? Is
Mhm.
there still that opposition? Have they made peace? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, some of this work takes a while, but some can heal really quickly. So it kind of depends on what layer that is. The bottom layer is the hardest part. But yeah, so I had a client who, for example, she was actually a financial advisor. And this was really interesting because I asked her about her relationship with her parents. And normally my clients are like, yeah, well, I guess my parents loved me. They never told me or showed me, but I'm their kid, so they must have, or some effect like that. And she said, oh, my parents were great. I'd come home from school and my mother said, hey, tell me all about your day. I'm so interested in it, you know. And I looked at her and I said, oh, I've never had a client tell me that before. So her bottom layer was really intact, but her parents were both very they're called like the innocent archetypes, so neither of them wanted to deal with money, and because of that they just did not want to deal with it. And so it led to chaos. Like they'd have money sometimes and things were great, but then they wouldn't, and her parents would not know what to do, and neither of them. And in fact, as she got older, she was the one who earned a degree in accounting and tried to figure that out. But she was so, but it led to such a chaotic upbringing that way that she, you know, it took her, even though she knew what to do, she didn't trust herself and her ability. And she was used to this pattern of chaos. So she recreated that for
Mm,
herself. And
mm,
it was only when she really understood what was going on and what she had inherited from her parents that she was able to figure all of this out. And but there was, yeah, so that was by the time we worked together, she had done a lot of work already. And so that was, it was really good. And actually, her biggest takeaway, now that I think about it, was forgiving herself for something, because she had a child when she was, I think, 17. And she just felt badly that she wasn't able to give him in his early years the type of childhood that she would have liked to, because she was in that chaotic place. And
sure.
so that really helped her with the forgiveness of realizing that. And also another breakthrough for her was that she didn't realize that she had this duality of, um, because her mother never worked and she was such a great mother, she wasn't sure if she could be a good mother and also work at the same time.
Mm.
And that's something she hadn't put together before we worked together. So a very short answer to that question is most people come out of working with me feeling they have more clarity and understanding and they feel better about themselves.
Sure.
Sounds kind of hokey, but like, yeah, more of just a sense of calm. And so, yeah, so they're able to use their money better, but also they just have this sense of calm. Yeah, that a level of stress and chaos has just been removed. And it's amazing how just very simple changes in perception can do that.
It is. And I remember times in my life, especially when everything seemed to be working, we had plenty of money in the bank, I was making a good income. Uh, and one of the things that showed up is we actually had a challenge in where I was working, where we were all kind of, well, two things. We worked on we measured our weight, so we were all trying to get into better physical health, but we were also all trying to get into better financial health. And so a number of people came to me, to fit, going back to the budget, but it was in a way that actually worked for people. Not so much, okay, let me show me all the horrors and terrible terrors and so forth, but just, I'm putting this thing together. Can you help me? And it was just a really positive time in my life when, my relationship with money was probably the healthiest it's ever been. Um, and, there's something that's really amazing and wonderful about feeling the sense of calm and peace with regards to money, right? That it doesn't have to be this uh, antagonistic opposition that it often is.
Yeah, and often people don't realize that it doesn't have to be that way because it's the only way they've ever known.
Yeah, I need to control my money, or I'm going to be controlled by it, or there's going to be this lack, this scarcity, or whatever, but that we can create this really healing, really helpful relationship with ourselves, with our money, with our relationships. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was I don't remember the exact term that you used, but the archetypes that the client's parents showed. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, so her parents were innocents, yeah, which is
Okay.
someone who is just not comfortable in the financial world at all, wants someone else to take over for them.
Okay. So how many different money archetypes are there?
Yep, there are 8. So the innocent is the one, and that's the one we're all born as innocent. We need people to take care of our needs for us. But when we're not empowered, we kind of stay there. We stay stuck in there. And innocents also, they fear abandonment. They feel being left alone. They often they don't want to see what's really going on, which a sense of naivete, which can often cause problems, of course. And they tend to be really indecisive as well. So I have a friend who's like a textbook innocent, and she's always asking everybody about money and what she should do, like her next door neighbor, like just like anybody. um, yeah, so that's the innocent. Would you like me to go through the archetypes?
Sure. Well, yeah, just a high level view. And I remember mine because they really resonated with me. If I remember right, mine were the warrior, the magician, and the creator slash artist, or
Mhm.
yeah, which
Yeah, so the warrior and
the
the
way you
magician is
described them were like, they were so right on. It's like, oh my gosh, how did you get that from me choosing just a few words?
yeah. So if you want to reveal more of your money psychology, the warrior and the magician are the 2 archetypes that we really want to grow into. The warrior being the opposite of the innocent is someone who's very comfortable in the financial world, the world of money. They make decisions quickly, they're confident, they're wise, they make good financial choices. And the magician is the archetype of the inner world. So the magician is someone who has a strong sense of themselves and is very balanced and very calm and peaceful around money because they they know that they're not tied to their current circumstance regardless of what it is. They know that they can always transform it, that they always have the power to create something new and different for themselves and something that they want to. So they're very I guess you can say they're aspirational, but actually I wouldn't use that word. They're very, it's the archetype of faith. So they just believe that things are
Okay.
going to happen the way they should for them. Yeah.
I've got to tell you a little secret on that part. That was something that probably shows up for me now that probably would not have shown up for me, say, 10 years ago. Um, it was through a lot of just having to trust and rely and, have faith regarding money that I now have a very calm sense that things always work out. Uh, in the past was much more of an anxious, fretful relationship.
Yeah. And would you say the amount of money you have was that the difference between the leap from, you can call it a scarcity mindset to abundance, or fearful
Well,
to knowing things will be okay?
Well, it was, but not in the way that you would think. It wasn't because I have more money. It was actually because I have less money than I had. And it was realizing, money doesn't have to control my life. That, whether I have a lot of money or don't have a lot of money, I still get to choose how I'm going to live my life. I still get to make the decisions that how I'm going to, wake up in the morning. I can choose where I'm going to work and how I'm going to work and who I'm going to work with. I'm not controlled by, I need to make X number of dollars, which is the way that I had been operating.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you said that, because I think this leap is really difficult for some people to imagine. It was difficult for me to imagine when I was there too. I was there too, I had a huge scarcity mindset. And now I don't. And I didn't think it was possible for me to get here, like calm. And so, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it's not about how much money you have. And it's so interesting how you can feel calm just with a change in perspective. But I think you really zeroed in on it, that you know, that you have the power. Like, we are so powerful. And we often, we're afraid of our own power, I think, because when we realize that, then we realize, well, we need to be responsible with it. And we can't be blaming our circumstances or other people if we're not getting what we want. And so, yeah, it really all comes down to that, and understanding how powerful we are. And once you realize that, you realize, I can change my situation if I want to. But I understand how it can seem impossible, or like a fairy tale, or like, no, but that's just because this particular circumstance, you had an inheritance or something else, or, you can point to any number of things. But
Right.
um, it's, yeah, so I really feel for people who can't see that leap, but it's there and it's available to you. It's available to everybody.
And that's the thing too, is it's not, especially when we're talking about money, and money so often is couched in, figuring out, and, it's a very intellectual exercise, how to balance a budget, or, how to create a model that will, project whatever. Very intellectual. And it's really easy to think that that's the solution, is to, figure out the right answer. And that was the way that I was totally wired, until I had my turning point, and really began to explore a different way of looking at life, and looking at myself, and looking at, the value that I bring into the world. That yes, money still flows, but it's not a, for me, money now is more of a byproduct of what I do than the purpose of what I do.
Yeah, beautifully said.
So when we let go of that kind of that scarcity, it's kind of like, when you're starving, all you can think about is food, right? When your money mindset is starving, all you can think about is money, even though that might not be the solution that you actually need. That it's kind of like, when I'm starving, and physically starving, and then all that's around are, Hostess cupcakes and ding dongs and, Milky Way bars. That's what I'm going to reach for, even though that might be a short-term solution. It is not a helpful solution for me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really good book. I don't know if you've read it, called Scarcity: Why Having So Little Means So Much.
Hmm.
It's excellent. It's based on tons and tons of research, lab research and field research, and that's exactly what their conclusion is. When we feel scarcity about anything, hunger or money, for example, it turns off the executive function of our brain. We like narrow so focused, so yeah, much on what we don't have, that we lose our perspective, which includes all the opportunity that's all around us. So that's why we stay stuck there.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what the magician is all about. It's about being aware of all the opportunity that's all around us all the time, and being able to tap into that and use that to get what we want.
Huh. Interesting. The other thing that came up for me was the creative artist, and the way that I heard you describe it was one that can be really cool. And I am absolutely an art lover and love to create in various ways. But I also recognize that, that the starving artist trope probably has a reason why it is such a pervasive trope, right? That it doesn't have to be that way, but it's often that way, just because of the way that we relate to money, relate to things around us.
Yeah, so the creator artist is very common archetype, and it's the archetype of someone who is very internally motivated, and like truth is very important to them. Authenticity is like at the crux. That is so important to the creator artist. And they often have a love-hate relationship with money. Like they'd rather, sort of like the innocent, they'd rather not have to deal with it, but it comes from a place of, but the innocent often enjoys money more. If someone else dealt with it and gave them all the material things they would like, that would be fine with the innocent. But the creator artist sees this huge conflict. There's like this really big tension in the creator artist of, because money can be used for good and evil, and because things aren't fair, and because some people have so little, so it can be a really difficult for a creator artist to understand, how can I enjoy what I have or more? How can I aspire to more when some people don't even have enough? And
Mm,
that's the greatest um yeah tension that they need to learn to deal with, because the truth is that's always going to be that way. Like you have to live in reality and also um, be able to manage all of these emotions at the same time, because that's what it is to be a human being, right?
mm,
Like you can feel grief and you can feel love and you can feel joy and you can feel sadness, and all of these things exist in the world at the same time. And um, yeah, so for the creator artist, it's just being able to navigate all of these different things, um, and realize that yeah, that's part of life, and that you don't have to punish yourself for having more than other people. That it's okay to use your gifts and to enjoy them and to enjoy
mm,
life. Yeah.
nice. So we're coming to the close of our conversation, and I want to thank you, Emily, for sharing all this information, helping us to see, one, that money isn't just about the numbers, that there is both the emotional component to it, as well as, that we can change our relationship with money. If we've got a bad relationship with money, that actually also means that we can have a good relationship with money.
Yes.
Going back to that archetype of the creator artist, is that, one of the things that's really central to art is the idea of contrast. So if there's good, there's bad. If there's, light, there's dark. If there's happy, there's sad. And instead of being overwhelmed by that, realizing that it's kind of like dipping into the paint on the palette and saying, okay, well, this is what I want to use here, and this is what I want to use here, and having more choice as to what it is you're creating. That you can use that creative power to create something that's much richer, more beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you shared a couple of links with me that I will put in the comments after this is complete. But could you just tell us, one, where people can connect with you, and two, where they might be able to take the quiz that we've talked about a little bit during our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with number 2. So you can take the quiz on my website, memyselfandmoney.com. You can follow the links to the quiz, or it's probably /quiz. And if you click the consultation link when you take the quiz, then I'll send you a personalized video of recording of your results in a few days. It could take a few days. And then just for, yeah, general information about me and what I do, it's memyselfandmoney.com. And also on the first page, you'll see I'm having a wants and needs workshop coming up next Friday. So that is one of my favorite things to do, is to help people change their perspective, just to change their thinking a little bit, and then it just frees up all of this energy and makes them feel better, even if yeah, nothing monetarily shifts at that point. It can lead to greater shifts in their money going forward, but it starts with this shift in belief or attitude. And
Mm,
so we're going to be talking about our wants and needs, and how to actually, yeah, the whole concept of wants versus needs drives me crazy. So how to rethink that to actually get what we want and need.
nice. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Emily. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.